I'm gonna show you how great I am.
This was our tiny tower.
I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I'd like to take this chance to apologize to absolutely nobody.
Hello, and welcome to How to Take Over the World. This is Ben Wilson. On this podcast, we dissect the lessons to be learned from the greatest leaders to have ever lived all throughout history. And this episode's gonna be a little bit different. Instead of going through one person's life and sharing my takeaways, as you probably gathered from the title, we'll be discussing my top 10 takeaways from all the episodes I did in 2025. So I went through and briefly reviewed every episode and pulled out some of my favorite lessons. As a reminder, the episodes that were released in 2025 were Charlemagne, Isaac Newton, Machiavelli, Captain Cook, Donald Trump, Coco Chanel, Edwin Land, Jesus, Francois de la Rochefoucauld, Bach, Hannibal, Thomas Jefferson, Scipio Africanus, Roger Federer, Arminius, Nietzsche, 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, Cleopatra, Andrew Carnegie. I also released video versions of Lee Kuan Yew, Joan of Arc, and Ernest Shackleton, who I had previously covered on the podcast. So I went back and reviewed them. Here's some of my top takeaways. Obviously, many of the lessons are the same no matter who we're talking about, because great leadership is great leadership, right? But instead of repeating the same lessons, I have chosen all new lessons from last year, because last year I also did a top 10 lessons. And as a reminder, those lessons were, number 1, the power of negative thinking. Number 2, leadership wins. 3, vision. 4, insist on quality. 5, eat light. 6, pain is where the progress is. 7, charisma is in the eyes. 8, Hawley's Law. 9, set simple, intuitive goals. And 10, 2 weeks can change your life. All right, I'll link that episode in the show notes if you want to go check out some of those lessons. So this isn't just the top 10 lessons that I could think of. It is the top 10 lessons that are new to this year that we hadn't necessarily discussed previously. So let's get into it. So number 1 is learn to communicate clearly at scale. The essential element of leadership is vision. You have to be able to have and articulate a vision. Otherwise, you can't lead people toward anything. And closely connected to the idea of vision is the ability to communicate it. That is how you lead. That is how you get people moving in the same direction. So some good quotes from this year that I thought really articulated well this idea that you need to be able to clearly articulate your vision. From Charlemagne, he was rich in eloquence and was able to express most clearly whatever he wished to say. I think that's so interesting because Charlemagne, in many ways, comes from a very foreign world to ours. It was over 1,000 years ago. And yet, the thing that the biographers articulate about him is that he could express his thoughts clearly. I just think that's so interesting that even back then, that is something that comes through. From Napoleon, long orders which require much time to prepare, to read, and to understand are the enemies of speed. So he wanted orders that were clear, could be read quickly, could be prepared quickly, and could get everyone moving with speed. From J. Paul Getty, this isn't from this episode, I actually stole this from Founders, but I listened to this year and I thought this fit in nicely. J. Paul Getty, a great entrepreneur, says, "The good executive is one who can explain things and tell people what needs to be done quickly and clearly." All right, again, that idea of speed and clarity. And then from Isaac Newton, quote, "Newton's letter was itself an experiment, his first communication of scientific results in a form intended for publication. It was meant to persuade. He had no template for such communication, so he invented one, an autobiographical narrative, step-by-step, actions wedded to a sequence of reasoning." I think that's so interesting because, number 1, it's a different domain. It's the domain of science. And 2, I think it shows that to be able to articulate your vision very clearly can take a number of forms. For many leaders, that means great speaking. You have to be able to articulate in public speech your ideas very clearly. But it can also take the form of, as the example of Napoleon shows, of written orders, or as the example of Isaac Newton shows, this new type of publication to get across his scientific ideas. So you don't necessarily have to be a great writer or a great speaker, and you can break those down. You don't have to be a great one-on-one speaker who can communicate clearly with just one other person or in small groups. You don't have to be a great public speaker. You just have to find a way of articulating your thoughts very clearly. That is what all leaders do. The mode changes. The media changes. The way they do it changes, but there is this constant through line of very clear communication. And often that means very simple communication. That is how you get to clarity. Julius Caesar is known as one of the best prose stylists of Latin. When people learn Latin, often Julius Caesar's campaigns are the first thing that a new Latin student will read. And why? It's because it's very rich and layered, but extremely simple, and therefore very clear and easy to grasp, okay? So you need to be able to communicate effectively, and the best way to do that is simply, clearly, and quickly. That's what all these quotes have in common. That's number one. Number two, define your myth. There is this tendency among greats to romanticize their story. That might even be putting a good spin on it. Some of them completely invent their story. So one great quote about this comes from a biography of Coco Chanel, who enjoyed lying shamelessly about her childhood. Here's the quote. It says, she said, "I don't like the family," she told Delay in one of a series of revelatory rambling conversations in her final decade. "You're born into it, not of it. I don't know anything more terrifying than the family." And so she circled and around and about it, telling and retelling the narrative of her youth, remaking history just as she remade the sleeves of a jacket, unfastening its seams and cutting its threads, and then sewing it back together again. "Childhood," she said, "you speak of it when you're very tired because it's a time when you had hopes, expectations. I remember my childhood by heart." And she fabricated all these stories of her childhood to fit in well with this idea that she was always born to be a fashion icon. She was always born to create clothing. Many of these, when you go fact check what she said, is not true, but she invented her own myth, and it was a very powerful myth that people bought into. Andrew Carnegie famously does this as well, exaggerating his civilian service in the American Civil War. He makes himself seem like a war-scarred veteran and hero. And then you go back and check it, and it's like, well, actually, how could Carnegie have been in this place getting these scars in the war effort when we have records of him being back in Pittsburgh, which is not a theater of war, right? But he massaged the truth to invent this myth for himself, and the myth was really powerful, even if he had to bend the facts a little bit to make it work. And to be clear, I'm not advocating that you lie about yourself and your story, but I do think you should be generous in the creation of your personal myth. I think many people feel like they're dishonest if they're doing anything but putting the harshest light on their personal history. But you shouldn't do that. That's not what the greats do. Give people a story that they can buy into. Donald Trump does this very well. Steve Jobs does this too well. He famously denies that he has a daughter who he has fathered because it doesn't fit into his frame, his story of who he is. And there are a number of stories that can be told in your personal myth. There's the rags to riches story, the underdog who overcomes the odds. There is the born winner who wins at everything they do, right? That's if you're born on third base, if you're born to wealth and privilege, then I think that's a good story to run with. I was born to win, baby. I've been doing it since childhood. There is the eccentric genius, right? That's a great way to explain away your weaknesses. Oh, everyone knows I have this foible, but hey, what can you do? I'm an eccentric genius, right? There is the bold, truth-telling outsider. There's all these different kind of stock narratives that you can tell about yourself, and you can use the facts in the proper way to tell the narrative that you want to in order to create your own myth. And that can be really powerful. One person who did this extremely well is Cleopatra. If you go back and listen to that episode, there's the famous story of her going down the river in Turkey as the goddess Isis. And she has all these servants surrounding her, fanning her. She's got all this perfume, all this wealth. And she really builds this myth around herself that she is a living goddess, and it works. It wins over Mark Antony and the public in that area. So I promise, even if you don't feel like a god or a goddess, you don't feel like you have enough to pull on to craft a Cleopatra type narrative, there is enough material that you can use to craft into a personal myth, to make a story that is larger than life and bigger than yourself. So craft your own myth. If you've been listening to this show for a while, you have heard me advertise Founders. Well, now the host of Founders, David Senra, has a new show where he interviews some of the greatest living founders. And I mean the greats. He's got long-form conversations with people like Daniel Ek of Spotify, Michael Dell, and Michael Ovitz of CAA. They are very in-depth conversations that really strike at the heart of what motivates them, how they think, and what actions they have taken to become the greats in their industries. I really love it. It's another great podcast from David Senra. So check it out. That podcast is called simply David Senra, and you can get it wherever you get your podcasts. This episode is brought to you by Zashi Wallet, where you can buy and store Zcash. Encryption is necessary for an open society in the electronic age. Encryption preserves your privacy and your anonymity and helps return to you the sense of freedom that past generations experienced. And Zcash is encrypted Bitcoin, digital cash that protects your agency and safety by encrypting your wealth. And that is something I really believe in. The idea that everyone, including governments and banks, would know what I am doing whenever I make a purchase is just horrible to me. So consider Zcash. You can buy, store, and spend Zcash using the Zashi Wallet, and you can find it in the App Store or Google Play Store. So give it a try. Again, that is Zashi, Z-A-S-H-I Wallet, and you can get it wherever you get your apps. Number 3, seize your moment. One of my favorite stories from all history is the moment, going back to the story of Cleopatra, when she's locked in a civil war with her brother. Caesar is in the royal palace with her brother, and he wants to make peace between the two of them, but she has no way to get to him. She's afraid that he's going to take her brother's side just because of proximity, because they're together. So she comes up with a plan for a servant to smuggle her in to the palace in a linen sack. And I love that moment when she decides that she is going to go through with the plan. She steps into the sack and says, let's do it. And of course it works. She isn't caught. She manages to sneak her way into the presence of Julius Caesar. They strike up a love affair. Her whole rise starts then. I think that there is something really magical about that moment when you decide, when you commit, when you roll the dice, that moment when Julius Caesar crosses the Rubicon in defiance of the Roman Senate, after which there is only victory or death. It's Alexander the Great burning his boats after arriving in Persia. There's no going back. It's Thomas Jefferson penning the Declaration of Independence. I'm either going to be hung as a traitor or I'm going to have an independent nation. The German author Goethe has a great quote about this, which I recently found, which is one of the reasons I want to draw out this lesson. This is one of these quotes that has just stuck in my mind. He says, "At the moment of commitment, the entire universe conspires to assist you." I love that. At the moment of commitment, the entire universe conspires to assist you. I think that's so true. When you fully commit, when you say to yourself, I am going to win or I'm going to die, I'm going to cross that Rubicon, things just start happening in your favor. And that might seem like a kind of remote lesson for the things that you and I are doing in the 21st century. But I think that great leaders of companies and movements and the kinds of things that we're doing can be described this way as well. It's Edwin Land, the founder of Polaroid, saying, hey, pull out some mattresses and put them on the factory floor because we are going to figure out instant photography or we're going to die trying. We are going to sleep here in the factory until we figure this out. And the question to ask yourself is, do you think your organization has a guiding star like that? Something that people would say, we are going to blank or we're going to die trying. Have you as an individual and have you as an organization had that moment of commitment? And it's scary to do, right? Because you're really laying it on the line. If you fail, if you make that commitment and then you fail, well, then you really fail, right? Because if you don't commit, then you can always say, well, I actually wanted this other thing, or it didn't mean that much to me. The moment of commitment opens you up to failure because you have said, this is what I really want. And if you don't get it, then you can't explain it away. And yet it's worth doing. It's worth the risk because it's incredibly powerful. As Goethe says, at the moment of commitment, the entire universe conspires to assist you. All right, so have that moment of commitment. Determine what that thing is that you would rather accomplish or die. Number 4, be alone to think, collaborate to build. All right, the episode about Isaac Newton made me think of this one. A Newton biographer, his name's Glick, writes, quote, solitude was the essential part of his genius. Okay, solitude was the essential part of his genius. He did all this great thinking alone. And Newton himself said, truth is the offspring of silence and meditation. I think that is really great. You need solitude in order to think, in order to be really creative. You can't have other people in your immediate vicinity shooting down your precious new ideas that might sound dumb or crazy at first. You need to give them time to blossom into something great. You need that solitude and that silence and meditation, as Newton says. Now, of course, to say that, you need solitude, you need meditation, you need silence. But, in the story of Isaac Newton, he does this and he comes up with his ideas. But then, so to take one example, he's building the first reflecting telescope. this new, very powerful and very compact telescope. And he grinds some of his own lenses. He does some of his own manufacturing, but he was not an expert on building mirrors, which is kind of the differentiating thing about this new telescope. So he had his friend John Wickens build his mirrors for him. That is not a moment where he had solitude and silence and meditation. Similarly, when Newton begins to come up with the ideas for gravity and Newtonian physics, he does it on his own. But it is his collaboration with his friend Sir Edmund Halley that inspires him to actually knuckle down and flesh out the details of the mathematical principles and write this book, Principias, which is one of the great scientific works of all time. And so he does both, right? He has that solitude to think, but then that collaboration to actually build the thing. You see that over and over again. You see it with Edwin Land, with Coco Chanel. They're alone to think of new ideas, but then they bring in others to collaborate to help them actually instantiate it in the real world, to actually build it. So the formula is you need solitude in order to be creative, but you need collaboration in order to build. Now, I should say, perhaps in artistic pursuits, it's the same principle, but in reverse. I'm thinking specifically of Picasso. That's an episode I did last year. And Picasso did the opposite, right? He went to be with other painters to think and talk about ways to innovate. And then he went to be alone to create. So it's the exact inverse of Isaac Newton. So I guess you have to figure out what is appropriate for your field. But the uniting theme of both of these approaches is you need to bounce back and forth between solitude and collaboration. And you've got to find the right balance for yourself and for your field. But I found that very helpful. Long periods of solitude, of contemplation, of just being able to think and be creative on my own, punctured with moments of collaboration to actually create and build with other people. Number 5, anti-inspiration. I love this idea. I've used this a ton, all right? I was really struck by this passage from a biography of Johann Sebastian Bach. It says, another source of the spark of his imaginative ability to elaborate comes in an observation recorded in 1741 that he, quote, does not get himself up to speed to delight others with the mingling of his tones until he has played something from the printed or written page inferior to his own ideas. So in other words, they're saying he doesn't start creating, he doesn't start composing music until he has played something that he thinks is not very good music. It's inferior music, it goes on, and has thus set his powers of imagination in motion. And yet his superior ideas are the consequences of those inferior ones. And so again, I call this idea anti-inspiration. If you are trying to improve at something, if you're trying to be creative in some pursuit, and all you take in are the people who are better at it than you, then you can actually kill your creativity because you become intimidated. You only see places where you can make mistakes. You see all this perfection, all this great work, and nothing really comes to mind of how you could improve on it. A really important practice then is to have anti-inspiration like Bach did. I do this all the time now. I have podcasts that I listen to specifically because I think they are not very good in specific ways. And so I listen to them, and it really gets my creative juices flowing when I listen to them because I'm thinking, oh, I would improve this. I would do this better. Oh, he should have made this point. And now I'm just overflowing with ideas of how to improve my own podcast, how to make a new episode, what great takeaways I could put into that episode. So it's important to have inspirations, of course. You also want to be looking at the people who are better than you, who you can see excellence and draw ideas from that excellence. You know, I do listen to other podcasts that I think are really good, like Founders, Cost of Glory, Acquired, Becoming the Main Character. And I draw inspiration from them. But I think it's really important to also have anti-inspiration, things that get the creative juices flowing because you see obvious ways to make them better. That's what Johann Sebastian Bach did, and he is one of the greatest creatives of all time. It seems counterintuitive, but if you've never tried this, I really highly recommend it. It's very helpful for being more creative. Please consider joining the Classical Society. This is something that I started with my associate, Alex Petkus. If you listen to How to Take Over the World, if you are interested in greatness, in excellence, in the virtues that are demonstrated by the people we talk about on this podcast, and you are someone who is successful in your field, then the Classical Society is for you. It is a business association. I sometimes jokingly describe it as YPO for people who like ancient Greece and Rome. But we have a debate and public speaking forum called Rostra. We have study groups for those who want to learn more about history. We have in-person events quarterly. It's still new. We started this just a couple of months ago, but we already have 35 members and we are now starting to really grow fast. It's already great and it's only getting better. I really think this is an organization that has the potential to change the world. So if you want to be like Benjamin Franklin or Andrew Carnegie or Steve Jobs and join a group of like-minded people who are interested in improving each other and themselves and changing the world together, then go to theclassicalsociety.com and submit an inquiry to learn more. I'm going to leave that in the premium edition. That wasn't really an ad. That is kind of an ad, but because it does cost some money. But I really hope you guys will think about it. I'm really excited about where this is going. Okay, number 6, make extreme decisions quickly. So I know that's kind of two things, but I'm pulling it from a single quote, and I love this quote from Machiavelli. And he's talking about the Romans. I believe this is from Discourses on Livy. He says, "The Romans always avoided a middle course of action and turned to extreme measures. Weak states are always ambiguous in their decisions, and slow decisions are always harmful." Okay, I love the way he talks in absolutes there. So the 3 elements of a good decision are all there. 1, extremity, avoid the middle course. 2, clarity, avoid ambiguous decisions. And 3, speed, slow decisions are always harmful. Avoid a middle course of action and turn to extreme measures. Can the decisions you make be described as extreme? Machiavelli talks about how the Romans, when they conquered a city, they would take one of 2 courses of action. They would either destroy the city completely, resettle the people or sell them into slavery, destroy the actual infrastructure of the city, or leave it and repopulate the town with Romans. Okay, boom, gone. Okay, total destruction. The other course of action, if they don't completely destroy you, what are they going to do? Are they going to levy some taxes? Are they going to make you lower your army so that you can't fight with them again? These people were just at war with you. How are you going to deal with them? No, they don't do any of that. The other course of action was to actually make the city better than before the war, make them full partners in the Roman Republic, grant citizenship to at least some of the leading men, if not all of the men in the city, restore their arms, don't impose any extra taxes or penalties. Basically just say, hey, we fought a war, good fight, but you're part of Rome now, and with all the privileges of Rome, and we're not just going to not punish you, we're going to actually make your situation better than it was before you went to war with us. Both are totally extreme decisions. Absolute destruction, or literally, I know we just fought, but I'm actually going to reward you. And they could often do both in the same war, because sometimes they'd be fighting multiple cities. And for a handful, they would completely destroy them. And for another handful, they would integrate them and make things even better. But the point was, they always took extreme measures one way or another. Okay, so that's the first element of a good decision. It can be described as extreme. Number 2, clarity. I won't really go over clarity because we talked about this in the first point, but you never want your decisions to be ambiguous. You always want people to know where you stand. And then the third element is decide quickly. For me, the all-time great example of this is Julius Caesar. He's waiting outside the walls to see if he can celebrate a triumph from his recent victories and if he can run for consul, which is kind of like president of Rome. It's the highest office. The problem is you need to physically stand for office if you run for consul. So you need to be inside the city walls to run for consul. However, you can't enter the city before you celebrate a triumph, if you're going to celebrate a triumph, which is the greatest honor any Roman can expect in his life. So Julius Caesar has this conundrum. I can't do both because I have to be in 2 places at once, right? So Julius Caesar has his men in the Senate propose an exemption that will allow him to run for consul in absentia. Basically, I'm going to wait out here to celebrate my triumph, but I'll run for consul remotely. Someone will stand for me. And ultimately, the proposal is rejected by the Senate. So now he's got to decide, run for consul, which is going to continue his rise, or celebrate a triumph, which is this great peak of any career within Rome. It's a really difficult decision, and I think most men would agonize over it for days. I really want to run for consul. I really want to celebrate a triumph. What do I do? Let me write some letters. Cicero, what do you think? Crassus, what should I do? Pompey, what's your perspective? But no, not Caesar. The next morning, before dawn, he is seen walking from the army camp into the city, essentially announcing his candidacy for consul and foregoing his triumph. He decides incredibly quickly. And I think the first point helps inform the third point. The clarity leads to speed, right? Because he's very clear about his priorities, he makes very clear decisions. That helps him to make very quick decisions because he knows what he wants. So again, the framework for decision-making is extreme, clear, and quick. If you want to take this to our times, to a more maybe contemporary perspective, I think Jeff Bezos has a quote on decision making that gets at all of these points and is really good. He says, most decisions should probably be made with somewhere around 70% of the information you wish you had. If you wait for 90%, in most cases, you're probably being slow. Plus, either way, you need to be good at quickly recognizing and correcting bad decisions. If you're good at course correcting, being wrong may be less costly than you think, whereas being slow is going to be expensive for sure. Also, use the phrase disagree and commit. This phrase will save a lot of time. If you have conviction on a particular direction, even though there's no consensus, it's helpful to say, look, I know we disagree on this, but will you gamble with me on it? Disagree and commit? By the time you're at this point, no one can know the answer for sure, and you'll probably get a quick yes. So I love his framing of that same idea. He's giving you an actual framework for making decisions that are extreme, clear, and quick, and especially quick. He's an expert at that. Okay, number 7, carry a waste book. This is going back again to Isaac Newton. I didn't realize how impactful that episode was on me until I did this. He had a book where he wrote down all of his ideas, his questions, the rough drafts of his research, and he called it his waste book. All right, like literally his trash book. These are my wasteful thoughts. Here's the quote about it. Quote, he opened the nearly blank 1,000-page commonplace book he had inherited from his stepfather and named it his waste book. He began filling it with reading notes. These mutated seamlessly into original research. He set himself problems, considered them obsessively, calculated answers, and asked new questions. He pushed past the frontier of knowledge, though he did not know this. He set down his knowledge of the world organized under elemental headings, expressed his questions, based sometimes on his reading, sometimes on speculation. Okay, so 2 things. 1, I love the idea of a waste book. I was just thinking of it as waste because it totally takes the pressure off of creativity. I don't have to have any good ideas, any good research. This is just my waste book. And paradoxically, that is what allows Newton to be creative and have all these really great ideas that emerge out of this very notebook that he calls wasteful. And then second of all, his writing down of questions and then answering them reminds me a lot of Da Vinci's notebook. Da Vinci would more often phrase it as an imperative. Newton did a question, Da Vinci did an imperative. So for Da Vinci, it was learn X, learn how a bird flaps its wings. Newton would phrase it as a question, what is the distance of the moon from the earth? But the idea is the same. And one of the reasons I like this practice is that so often when we get in problem-solving mode, we settle for sufficiency rather than mastery. So for example, for my own life, if the show How to Take Over the World isn't getting enough downloads, then I will focus on growth, right? Let's get some more downloads. But then basically, as soon as I figure something out and I'm getting good results, I abandon the pursuit. I'm like, okay, great. I need more downloads. I juice downloads a little bit. This is an acceptable level. Let's move on. But if I phrased it like Newton or Da Vinci, then it becomes more comprehensive. Either learn podcast growth or how do podcasts grow? How do they get more listeners? Then, if you framed it that way, it's not enough to try things until I get some traction. Then I'm on a quest to learn everything there is to know about podcast growth. What are all the levers I can pull? Which ones work? What is most cost effective? When are there diminishing returns? What works for different kinds of shows? It gets very comprehensive when I phrase it that way. Oh, learn podcast growth. Okay, I've really got to learn podcast growth then. What is everything that there is to know about podcast growth? Da Vinci and Newton were geniuses because they approached problems comprehensively. And I think this approach that they used in their notebooks is a good way to help with framing that in the right way. All right, number 8, go a little too far. Okay, I got this one from Andrew Carnegie, which is the most recent episode I did. He wrote in his journal, quote, whatever I engage in, I must push inordinately. Inordinately means too much, right? And he meant it. He always went a little too far, did a little too much. People would roll their eyes at him. He was a religious convert to Bessemer steel, this new process for creating steel. And people would really feel like, geez, Carnegie, can you talk about something else for just 1 second? And when it came to managing his employees, he would check in one too many times. He would push them just a little too much, offer advice just a little more than what was necessary and what people wanted. And it was too much, right? It would have been better if he could have done just the perfect amount of publicity and oversight and management and all this stuff. Obviously, perfect is perfect. But the point is, it is far better to do a little too much and then course correct back than it is to do not quite enough. My twist on the Beatitudes is that the shameless will inherit the earth. That's what Carnegie was. That's what Steve Jobs was. All these people who do a little too much, they're just shameless about it, right? They don't care that they go a little too far. They're always willing to pull it back. Carnegie wrote to one employee that they should post, quote, advertisements in every journal devoted to the mechanical engineering and architectural arts. Someone should read a paper upon it before the engineers. Your Franklin Institute should know about it. Indeed, I should within 10 days have so advertised it as to render it almost impossible that any man of intelligence should be ignorant of the fact that an important step has been taken by us in the use of wrought iron columns. Right? Obviously, that's what he's discussing. So it's not like he's doing too much. He doesn't want to just make it possible. He doesn't want you to hear about it one time. He wants to make it impossible for you to not know what he has done. All right? If you want to reach that level, then you've got to be willing to talk about it to a level that people are like, all right, that's a little too much. When it comes to marketing and publicity, you don't just want to make it possible for people to hear about you. You want to make it impossible for them to be ignorant of you. To do that, you need to go a little too far. Donald Trump is also an expert in this. He writes in The Art of the Deal, my style of deal making is quite simple and straightforward. I aim very high, and then I just keep pushing and pushing and pushing to get what I'm after. Sometimes I settle for less than I sought, but in most cases, I still end up with what I want. You just push and push and push to get what you're after, even if you're a little bit of a pest. And a lot of people did think of him as a pest. And occasionally, it will come back to bite you in minor ways if you go a little too far. But if you perpetually never go far enough, then you never test your limits. You never find out what you're capable of. And you never reach, from a publicity standpoint, that level of saturation that is necessary to accomplish truly great things. So in marketing, in publicity, in pushing for what you want, it is better to go a little too far than to not push hard enough. Number 9, knowing what you want is a superpower. So many people don't know what they want in life. Actually, that is the default mode for, 95% of people. They don't know what they want. They're just going through the motions of life. And if you can't give yourself a goal, if you can't know what it is that you want, how are you going to set a goal for others and be a leader? As Genghis Khan says, without the vision of a goal, a man cannot manage his own life, much less the lives of others. Donald Trump says, know exactly what you want and keep it to yourself. He says that's his superpower. This is actually the secret of Joan of Arc. She had no military experience. We actually don't hear much about her being a rousing speaker. She's not much of a strategist. But why was she so successful where no one else was? All these other people who were great strategists, who were great military men with lots of experience, who were great speakers, who had crowns and regalia and status. Why was she more effective than all of them? It's because she knew exactly what she wanted, and she just was able to focus on it and articulate and re-articulate it over and over again and get people around that one simple idea. That clarity, when you have that clarity, I know what I want, then that clarity spreads to others, and it is like a magnet. It just attracts people to your vision when you have that clarity of, I know what I want. I haven't released this episode yet, but I'm working on a Hitler episode. And this was one of the big keys to his success. When the Nazi party is rising in Germany, they're becoming more and more powerful. They're getting more and more votes. And they get into a place where they are nearly big enough to get a majority, but they're not quite there. And it's a parliamentary system. And so all these other political parties offer to make a coalition government with them. And Hitler takes the line that the one thing that he wants is to be chancellor. All these other parties say, well, we'll make a coalition with you, but what about vice chancellor? Or what about vice chancellor plus this position and this position? And they make all these offers and deals and offer all these packages of different positions and stuff. And he turns them all down. And the other Nazi party members are starting to get mad because they think he's risking throwing everything away that they have built. But he knows the one thing that he wants, the one thing that he needs to take power is for him to be chancellor. Everything else falls into place after that. And because of his obstinance, because he rejects every deal, he has that clarity of knowing what he wants, then he holds out and he does become chancellor and he takes power. Obviously, you don't want to be like Hitler in many ways, but I do think it's appropriate to learn from how he took power. And that was having just one essential goal, knowing the one thing that he wanted above everything else. So you need that one thing. Knowing what you want and insisting on it is a superpower that unlocks success. I hope I was clear that was not an endorsement of Hitler. And this episode will not be an endorsement of Hitler. We're learning from his rise to power. Okay. And then the final takeaway, be competitively playful. This is from the Roger Federer episode. I'll quote briefly. One coach said, I saw how stubborn he was and also how playful he was. Very, very playful. And then someone asks him how someone so temperamental could possibly be playful. And he responds, competitively playful is how I describe him at that stage. Everything was a game, whether it was on the court, off the court, or in conversation. And still today, if you have a casual conversation with him, just having a guy's talk, there's always an element of competition to it, whether it's a joke or more serious. But because of his playfulness, it was hard for him to keep his concentration and to really stick to one thing in those days. He needed a lot of variety. And if you didn't give him variety, he would become a nuisance. Okay? And I just think that's such a winning formula. As I think about Captain Cook exploring, as I think about Coco Chanel and Edwin Land with entrepreneurship, as I think about Newton and Da Vinci as scientists, Machiavelli and Nietzsche as writers and thinkers, all of them were competitively playful. They had a mindset of playfulness, but they obviously aren't just, smiling and goofing off all the time. No, they're also competitive. And that is how I want to be on a day-to-day basis. Playful, yes, enjoying life, doing things that I genuinely feel passionate about, but not purely in a playful way, in a competitively playful. I'm also overcoming, I'm trying to improve. I'm both competitive and playful. So that is takeaway number 10. And that does it. So those are my top 10 takeaways from 2025. 1, communicate clearly at scale. 2, define your myth. 3, seize your moment. 4, be alone to think, collaborate to build. Number 5, use anti-inspiration. 6, make extreme, unambiguous decisions and make them quickly. 7, carry a waste book. 8, go a little too far. 9, knowing what you want is a superpower. And then 10, be competitively playful. All right, that does it for free listeners. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you want more content like this, I do more topic-based episodes on the premium feed. You can subscribe to that at takeoverpod.supercast.com or in the app if you are listening on Apple Podcasts. For premium subscribers, I'm going to give a little more to the end of this episode. I am going to be previewing the episodes that I have planned for 2026, going through my framework for goal setting and New Year's resolutions. So if you want to listen to that, you can subscribe. Otherwise, thank you for listening to How to Take Over the World. Before we wrap up, one plug for Speechify. All the greats are obsessed with learning as much as possible. They have this incredible thirst for knowledge. And Speechify is a tool that can help you learn more and learn faster. It turns any written content into a podcast, articles, books, textbooks, and even emails. I use it all the time, both for research for this show and for things that I just want to learn more about. If you're a fan of this show, I'm sure you'll love it. So go to Speechify.com/Ben and get 15% off Speechify Premium. Again, that is Speechify.com/Ben.